All right. So, good morning. We are here with the new executive director. Is that the correct title? The executive director
That's correct.
of Empower
Mhm.
Missouri, probably a month or two, perhaps. So, why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers?
Well, good morning. My name is Mallory Rusch. I am a native here to the great city of St. Louis, raised on the south side of the city. I've been working in the nonprofit sector here for the last 15 years, first with direct service organizations and then as a nonprofit consultant. And I'm thrilled to have joined the team at Empower Missouri about 7 weeks ago.
And what made you decide that Empower Missouri was going to be your next step?
I had decided actually about 3 years ago that I really wanted to make a shift from working in direct service to working on the policy and advocacy side of things. So, in each of the direct service organizations that I had worked for, what I saw was that nonprofits were just continuously coming up against significant policy roadblocks at every step of the way. So I started my career working in criminal justice reform with an organization called the Center for Women in Transition. Spent about 3 years there and saw that, there was just only so much that we could do for these just phenomenal women who were coming out of the justice system who really had never needed to be in the justice system to begin with. The vast majority of women who are incarcerated on drug charges. These women needed to be in treatment programs, not locked up. And
And I
so,
would say many times they're in they're in the criminal justice system based on what somebody else did, and they were literally, I would say, held hostage, and so they are now serving time because of other folks' action. Not saying they're not guilty, quote unquote, but there were other extenuating circumstances.
absolutely, that's absolutely the case. And so, there was so much that we were trying to do to try to help these women reclaim their lives. And they were coming up against just constant roadblocks in terms of being able to get safe and stable housing, to be able to get stable employment, to be able to access benefits while they were on their way to getting stable housing and employment, to be able to be reunited with their children who were often taken from them during this process. And at the end of the day, there was just only so much that we could do because Missouri has some of the most punitive laws in place across the country to make sure that once someone has been incarcerated, they can never really get their life back, that we are punishing them for the rest of their lives.
Right.
And so I learned that lesson really fast, right? And then I saw that repeated in every other sector, in every other part of the sector that I worked in, right? I saw it in working with post 9/11 veterans, how much the VA is just in complete and total disarray and not actually serving the veterans of any war, but particularly of our most recent conflicts. I saw it when I worked in education reform and saw that, there was just only so much that we could do to support teachers and students in really a failing public school system that the system has sort of abandoned because of our really broken and racist funding formula that we utilize statewide. And so, I made after 10 or 12 years, I made a decision to say, I can't in good conscience keep working on these solutions that are really just at the end of the day putting band-aids on bullet holes. I want to be able to, work to reform the problems that exist. And those problems are rooted in bad policy. And so I went back to school, I got a master's degree, and started sort of this quest to be able to work more on the policy and advocacy side of things. And that road eventually led me to Empower Missouri.
So most of what you've done in your life is encapsulated in the work of Empower Missouri: criminal justice, education, housing, affordable housing. All those are elements of Empower Missouri. But briefly, what does Empower Missouri do? What is this function?
Sure. So Empower Missouri is this really incredible and storied statewide organization that's been up and running since 1901. So we're actually celebrating our 120th anniversary this year, which people will be hearing much more about as the year goes on, as we celebrate that work.
But you've had several different names, correct?
That is true. Yes, we've only been in power for the last 10 years or so. For the longest stretch of time, it was the Missouri Association for Social Welfare, or MASW. So many people likely still know it as that or remember it as that. Yeah, thanks. That's a good catch. um, and so we, from the very beginning, have worked for the basic rights and equal justice for all Missourians. And so we, in our current form, run 4 statewide coalitions. We run a food security coalition, an affordable housing coalition, a criminal justice coalition, which in its current form is known as the Smart Sentencing Coalition, and then an HIV justice coalition. Um, so we convene organizations from all across the state who work in those 4 issues to come together and to set a policy agenda. And then we work with those organizations to legislate for substantive changes at the state level.
And just to be clear, you are a statewide organization that accepts people statewide. So no matter where they live across Missouri, you want them at the table to help and assist and provide information and resource on these various issues.
Absolutely.
Because I want to make sure people understand that we're not excluding anyone. And I sit on the affordable housing one, and I find the work that people are doing around the state just remarkable. So I'll say that. Um, how do you well? We'll talk about the board a little bit. How many people are on the board, and how does one become a board member?
Sure. So our current board is small. We're in the midst of a transition. We had a few people who rolled off the board at the end of the year, and our current board is still in the process of filling those seats. So our current board has just 5 members, but they're in the process, actually right now, of accepting applications and preparing to build the board back up to somewhere between 8 and 12 members for the time being. So there's actually an application to join the board on our website. We're very committed to a public process to seek and accept applications for the board. So our website is empowermissouri.org, and I would certainly encourage anyone who's interested in getting involved and taking a leadership position with the organization to apply.
And what's the deadline for application?
It's a rolling deadline, so they're reviewing applications as they come in on a monthly basis.
Okay. How do you define basic need? Because I know that that's sort of something that runs through um, a lot of the different committees or coalitions.
Mm. It's such a tricky question, right? I think that I certainly don't think that Empower is the be all and end all in defining what basic needs are. But I think for our purposes, that's really where we think about access to safe, affordable housing, access to adequate, nutritious food, and in a lot of cases, even though we don't run a coalition on it, access to affordable health care. So while Empower Missouri doesn't run a coalition in the healthcare space, we've been very involved in issues surrounding healthcare over the years, including working last year to help to get Medicaid expanded with a number of many other organizations across the state. So I would say like those are the 3 sort of cornerstone issues that comprise basic needs for us.
And how does one become an ally or a partner of Empower Missouri? Is there a criteria? Are you looking just for people who are in the field doing the work, whether they be an individual or organization, that can assist everyone?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, it's so interesting. I think, we are, I think that that has changed a lot over time. And I think we are currently in flux. It's my position that I want anyone and everyone at the table who has an interest in supporting this need for equal justice and basic rights across the state of Missouri. So, we certainly are extremely interested in bringing people to the table who fall into two categories. So, one, we're really interested, as you said, in bringing folks to the table who are working on the front lines of these issues every single day, right? So, folks who have this really firsthand knowledge of what the issues are that are affecting Missourians, and what we can do to fix them. Because, I think that, like most legislative bodies, the folks that comprise the Missouri legislature don't necessarily have that firsthand knowledge of what the issues are. And so the more that we can elevate the voices of those who are, working in the community day in and day out to come in to educate our elected officials and say, hey, if you really want to solve this problem, here's what the fix is, right? Not this, policy that we pulled from another state, or, not necessarily this thing that we read that in a case study, but like, here's what we actually need on a day-to-day basis. And then at the exact same time, I'm very interested in expanding the number of directly affected individuals who come to our table and are a part of the conversation. And by that, I mean, I want more people to be part of our food security coalition who have directly experienced food insecurity. I want more people at our affordable housing table who have dealt with the fear of homelessness, who have dealt with the fear of eviction or being locked out of their homes, or dealing with landlords in really unfair situations. We've worked really hard to ensure that our HIV Justice Coalition is comprised primarily of people who are living with HIV. So, I think that often in the nonprofit sector, we have, sort of deferred to the voices of others to talk about, what the problems and issues are in various spaces, while ignoring the voices of those who have firsthand experience with the issues that we're trying to deal with. And so, when I think about who our allies are, I really want to work with and to raise up those who have dealt with these issues, who have overcome these issues, who really know what it takes to get through. I think that their voices are perhaps the most valuable that we have, and I'd love to see those groups of people get more involved. But then, of course, we are an inclusive organization and we welcome absolutely anyone to come to the table, right? So if you are just an individual who, isn't affiliated with any organization, but you're sitting at home and thinking, man, I would really love to make sure that every single person in Missouri has access to adequate nutritious food, come to the table. We'd love to have you. More hands are always better.
Now, doesn't it also then change the conversation? I know I've been on several calls where um, people would say, I don't understand what you're saying. You're using acronyms that I'm not familiar with. So it reminds people that, there's no offense, but there's a lot of degreed people who use the language is such that it's stilted, not in a negative way, but it's the language of the environment. And having people come to the table is not only a reminder of the work that needs to be done, but how to change the language to make it um, comprehensible for the folks who are being served.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that, in one of the organizations that I previously worked for, we were especially guilty of this. It was an organization of acronyms, as we like to say. And so, even when new staff would come in, I remember when I first started there, sitting in meetings my first week and just constantly jotting down acronyms with question marks so that I could be like, what is this? Someone tell me what this is. I feel very left out of the conversation. And so, I think that as we continue to build our tables over the next year, over the next several years, as we work to reach more people with different sets of experiences, where we are really going to have to make that adjustment and make sure that the conversations that we're having are in layman's terms, right? And that's how they should be. And quite frankly, that's a really good exercise for us also in making sure that we're doing that when we go into the Capitol building and we're having those conversations with legislators, because they don't want to have a jargon filled conversation about what the issues are. They want to speak in plain language about what the problems are and how we can fix them.
So let's talk now. How does Empower Missouri do the work that it does?
Yeah, so I mean, our work, I would say, can really be summed up in two areas, right? So it starts with coalition building, and then it moves into advocacy. So we start by really trying to bring as many people to the table as possible to understand what's happening in these issues in various parts of the state. I think that often there is um, a tendency in Missouri to define what's happening in the state by what's happening along the I-70 corridor, right? You have conversations in St. Louis, you have conversations in Kansas City, maybe you talk to some people in Columbia along the way, and we sort of say like, well, these are the problems, but we know that that's not true, right? We can't actually do it like that. Missouri is a much bigger state beyond the counties that fall along I-70. And so that's actually something that's going to be a huge area of work for us in the year ahead, is going to be, really looking at who comprises our coalitions and saying, are we adequately reflecting the needs of rural Missourians, and do we have enough organizations at the table, organizations and individuals who reflect those rural issues.
But there is a real split, unfortunately, between rural and urban, more on the line, I would say, of legislators than an actual people. I'm also thinking about other organizations that have been part of the affordable housing, and they talk about the problems in rural Missouri. And it doesn't sound any different than urban Missouri. There's a need for affordable housing. There's a need for shelter care. Frankly, there's a need for health care to go along with it. So a lot of practitioners understand that there's really not a split. It's kind of only when you get in the legislature, House and Senate, that this sort of, well, we don't do that down there kind of thing, and we don't do that up here. And maybe your coalitions can help provide some of that, and I know they do provide some of that. Hey, there's no difference here. These are all people who need help. They need assistance, they need service.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the point, right? Is that the number of legislators who represent rural communities in Missouri far outnumber the ones who represent urban communities. And so, if we're really going to drive home the issues that are facing our state, I think it's really easy for folks to think about some of these problems that we're talking about and think, those are just urban issues. But as you just laid out, of course, they're not. Some of the most food insecure counties in the entire state are in very southern Missouri and in the Boot Heel. And so, really making sure that we're saying to legislators, these are issues that are affecting people in your counties, in your hometowns, in the areas that you cover. We're looking for solutions for everyone, including the people that you directly serve. It's interesting, very like a very real world, real time example is that we are doing a lot of work right now with our HIV Justice Coalition, to help build awareness about the damage that Missouri's current HIV criminalization laws do. And I think that, it's very easy for people to think about HIV and think about it as an urban issue, which of course is just factually incorrect. And actually, in the current moment, it's our rural communities in Missouri who are the most at risk for the spread of HIV because of the opioid crisis in the state of Missouri and many other rural communities, because we know that HIV can be spread through needle sharing. And so, I was just in the Capitol building last week. I'm going back next week to talk to legislators about these issues and say, look, Missouri is one of 7 states that has been identified by the CDC as being at high risk for HIV spread in rural communities. That's your hometown, that's
Right.
your community.
Yeah.
Let's have a real conversation about these policies, to curb the spread of HIV. And I think that that's really eye-opening for some people to be able to see those numbers and those statistics and have those conversations.
And then I guess it's difficult once you present the numbers because you're talking about changing a mindset. That doesn't affect us here. That's their problem. And so when you shine that light on it, it's people. I would guess people have trouble um, with the concept. Well, what do I do with what do I need to do with the information that I have? Because guess what? It's different than I thought.
Mm. Yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that happens in the process, right? We don't, and this is true of all humans, not just legislators. We typically have developed a worldview given our set of experiences, and we don't want to take in information that doesn't fit within that existing worldview. And so I think that's why it's really important. And, one of the things that, again, I think Empower Missouri has done really well traditionally and will continue to work to improve is, putting the voices of affected individuals in front of legislators. So not just coming in and, giving a bunch of testimony filled with facts and figures, which while those can be startling or eye-opening, at the end of the day, people want to help people. And so when we are able to, showcase a story that really sticks in the mind of a decision maker, that is when real change can happen. And so, unfortunately, we're living in a really difficult moment for that, right? Because of COVID, and because, unfortunately, because the legislature has made it difficult, bordering on impossible, to deliver virtual testimony.
Sure.
We're basically in a position of asking people to come to the Capitol building where there have been multiple outbreaks of COVID because legislators have been refusing to wear masks on some sort of odd political principle, rather than keep themselves and others that come into the building safe. So, we are in a difficult position as an organization to be able to want to, bring those voices to the table, to include people in the conversation, to highlight their stories, and also wanting to make sure that people are safe. And so, this session in particular, we're walking just a really, really thin tightrope trying to meet both of those needs.
How do you define success? Is that item by item. I do well one day, I don't do well another. How do you define success um, and empower Missouri?
Mm, such a good question. So, I think traditionally, at the beginning of every legislative session, Empower sets a legislative agenda that has, a number of priority bills in each of our coalitions. And then we work really hard to make sure that we can pass those bills or that we can make significant progress on those bills, knowing that oftentimes the type of legislation that we're working on is going to take multiple sessions to pass, right? So we, can't can't always define success or failure by saying, okay, we're going to introduce this new piece of, or we're going to have one of our allies in the legislature introduce this new piece of legislation. Our success or failure rides on whether or not it's put into law this session. If that was the case, I think our fail rate would be much, much higher than our success rate. Instead, we have to be able to look and see, did we change hearts and minds on this issue? Did we pass it through committee? Did we get a floor vote in one of the chambers? Because that is the kind of thing that then sets up a bill for success in future sessions, right? I think it's important for people to know and understand that in any given legislative session, 1,500 pieces of legislation or so are filed that then have to, only a very, very small fraction of which actually make it to the governor's desk for signature, given that our legislature only meets for 5 months out of the year, and that during that time they also have to pass the state budget, which is a huge lift on the part of our legislature. So,
So do you
I
play
think.
you? But it seems like the meetings that I've been in, Empower Missouri does two things. You play offense, but you also play a considerable amount of defense.
Mm.
And I think these days you all sort of end up playing more defense than you do offense, keeping harmful legislation from getting out of committee, getting to the floor, et cetera. I would say you should take a little more credit than you just gave yourself, uh, because again, you're playing defense and harmful legislation. The committee that I was in, I guess last week, I don't remember, was House Bill 71 about tenant landlord action. And you're going from 10 days for a tenant to file a rebuttal or a motion to 5 days. That is very
Mhm.
harmful legislation because it does. One of the things I don't know that it says is 5 working days. Or, so if somebody files, if something happens on a Tuesday, if you include Saturday and Sunday, you're looking Monday. If you don't file, you can be evicted. So,
Mhm.
hey, give yourself a little pat on the back for playing your defense. But talk about that a little bit. It's both, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, yeah, when we set the legislative agenda, it is both bills that we are trying to pass and also bills that we are trying to ensure never pass. So, one of the things that Empower, in that vein, that Empower has been working on year over year is really holding back the legislature from putting in place really harmful work requirements for individuals and
Mm,
families who are receiving SNAP benefits. So SNAP, for those who might not know, is the actual name for what we commonly refer to as food stamps. And so, every year some legislator brings to the table a proposal to say, well, if you want to get these benefits, you have to show that you are working at least 20 hours every week. And some folks might hear that and say, well, that's that doesn't seem like that big of a deal. That seems, fine that we should want people to be working while they're receiving benefits. And on a fundamental level, we don't necessarily disagree with that. But the thing that it's important to remember is that, families that are receiving SNAP benefits are often facing very difficult circumstances. Maybe there's a member of the household that has become ill. Maybe there it has been, a death in the family. Maybe there has been an injury or a reason that the primary wage earner can't work for a while. And so, SNAP was designed to be a social safety net, to catch families when they fall upon hard times, so that they are not then just left floundering, reliant on churches or community food banks to make sure that their family has meals, but that they can fall back and say, okay, we've had this situation, we need a moment. We know that our basic needs are still going to be covered until we can sort of get up and take care of ourselves. And so, when we put these work requirements in place, it doesn't take into consideration any of those issues, right? And it places just a really, really harmful set of circumstances on families who are already struggling, who, might, especially in the current crisis. We were just in the Capitol last week, giving testimony on this year's work requirement bill. And we're really emphatic that this was a particularly bad idea during a pandemic, when we know that so many Missourians are struggling to find work, and that, so many jobs that low wage earners, which the vast majority of SNAP recipients are relatively low wage earners, have access to, have been impacted by the pandemic, right? Restaurant workers and venue workers, things like that. Anything in sort of the hospitality industry, hotel workers. And so, it's especially damaging right now. And work requirements are incredibly punitive, right? So they're designed to punish folks who can't meet that weekly requirement, including that in this year's bill, if the head of household is unable to meet those requirements, the legislature would actually be taking away the benefit for the entire family, including the children. And so our estimate says that this would impact 40,000 children across the state of Missouri. And so this is obviously incredibly harmful legislation. Empower was there along with many child advocates across the state saying, please don't pass this bill, not ever, but especially not this year. And luckily, I think that this is at least the fourth year in a row that we've come up against similar legislation. And you're right, we have been successful every year at holding it back, and we're very hopeful that we'll be successful again at holding it back this year. So that is certainly a big part of what we do as well.
In your opinion, does letter writing still work? Does it still have um, a heft to it? And so that's one question. The other question is, could I live in a democratic, I live in a place where my representative, my senator are Democratic. So writing letters to them, to me, is useless. But why not write to someone in rural Missouri and say, this is what the issue is in the city? We don't talk about doing that, and I'm not sure that would or would not be helpful. So that's the second question.
Mhm. It's a good question. I think that every legislator operates a little bit differently, right? So it's a little hard to know what avenues are the best way to reach folks, right? So yeah, you can do a traditional letter writing campaign where you're physically sending a letter in the mail. You can send emails, you can make phone calls, you can tweet at a lot of legislators these days, which, some folks are more active on social media than others, but there certainly are legislators who engage with constituents on platforms like Twitter. So I think that largely, of course, we still encourage individuals to engage with their legislators and to engage with any legislator in the state of Missouri who has been charged with making a decision that is going to impact them, right? So one thing that we do at Empower after one of our priority bills has a hearing is that we send the names and phone numbers and email addresses of all of the legislators who sit on the committee that is sort of the initial gatekeeper for that bill, to decide whether or not it's going to get a vote on the floor. So yeah, often we're encouraging people to reach out to folks who are not their direct representative, but who are charged with making a decision that we really care about. So, I think it's incredibly important that legislators remember that they work for us, not the other way around. We put them in office and we have the power every 2 years to remove them from office if we're not satisfied with their performance. So, certainly outreach to legislators is a huge part of what we encourage at Empower.
So when a bill comes up in a committee hearing is really when the letter, because I guess that's kind of the first step after introduction and the first hearing is after the first read is it goes to the committee. Once it's assigned to a committee, then you all will say that's probably when the letter writing should take place.
Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, though, I mean, there's often a very limited window of time that a bill is in committee, right? So we will sometimes, well, that's not true. Often pieces of legislation are assigned to committee, but then can sit just on that committee's assignment list for
Right.
the entire session and never actually get a hearing. So often from the time that a bill is assigned a hearing to when it ultimately gets a vote in that committee is often less than 10 days, right? So we're talking about a very limited window of time when legislators are actively looking at a piece of legislation and deciding whether or not it's going to pass out of committee to be heard by the entire chamber. So that then sort of targeted intervention in that moment is really impactful, but people do have to be sort of on high alert all the time to be ready to send that kind of outreach as soon as we're aware that it's getting some attention.
So here, I'll give you, I'll throw a softball to you. Or they can go on the Empower Missouri website where you have a bill tracker. So you want to talk about the bill tracker?
Thank you for that. Yes. So on our website at empowermissouri.org, in that top navigation bar, you will see an area of bill trackers. And so for each of our priority legislation areas, you can click into any of those, into food security, into affordable housing, into criminal justice, into healthcare, and you can look and see all of the bills that we are tracking in that legislative session. So some of those bills, we track a larger group of bills than are part of our priority legislation, because sometimes something that we don't think is a priority at the start of the session becomes a priority during the session, because maybe there's something that gets more traction than we thought, or because advocates across the state tell us, no, that's actually really important to us. It would have, XYZ positive effect or XYZ negative effect. Please go and advocate for this. So we track a much larger number than we are sort of critically focused on, but it is a great way for people to see, what bills have been filed and what stage they are during the entire process of the session.
And just to remind people, while there are all of these coalitions, you all really are only focused on the state and the implications of state law and state budget have statewide. but it is really, because I've also learned what's going on in other places around the state, but you all are really solely focused on state issues.
Yeah, I think in the current iteration of the organization, that is certainly the case, and certainly is really all we have capacity for with our current staff size. Personally, I would
Which is
love.
how many, by the way?
Uh,
Thank
right
you.
now,
I forgot to ask that.
there's just four of us, but we are certainly understaffed at the moment. We're hoping to bring on two additional staff members this spring, so stay tuned. Sort of our full capacity right now sits at around 6 or 7. Um, but I would love to see the organization be able to grow over the next 5 years, so that we could do more work at a local level as well, right? So a lot of times for things to pass in the state legislature, um, our elected officials want to see proof of concept, right? They want to know this is something that works. And so I would love to see us working more with local activists to put policies in place at the local level across the state, so that we can then be able to go back to the Missouri legislature and say, hey, here's this really successful program in Joplin. We would love to look at some funding to be able to expand this to 4 other cities across the state. And if the state's not willing to do it, to go from Joplin to Kirksville or Joplin to Hannibal and say, hey, this worked really well in Joplin. What do you think about trying to implement it here as well? Knowing that so much change does happen at the local level. But at the current moment, it's not a huge focus of ours, but that's just a little bit of a preview of where the organization might be heading in the next 3 to 5 years.
So I want to read your mission really quickly. Empower Missouri works to secure basic human needs and equal justice for every person in our state through coalition building and advocacy. So that pretty much says that each and every person in the state, and I align that to a human rights agenda, if you will, where every person has equal human rights around the basic necessities. Would that be fair?
Absolutely.
We have a few minutes left. Um, you all have ways of informing people about what you do. You have a newsletter and you have an email alert. You want to talk about both of those?
Absolutely. So you can sign up for our email list at our website, empowermissouri.org. We send a weekly email on Wednesday, which is, I think, valuable all year round, but especially during the session. We're providing weekly updates on key legislation that's going to be heard and how people can get involved. And then when we do have issues come up that we need sort of immediate action on from our advocates across the state, we will send action alerts as well, to say, hey, this bill is getting heard today. Please call these legislators this afternoon and tell them how you feel about it, or please tweet at these legislators today and tell them how you feel about it. So that really will give you that up to the minute support. So if you visit empowermissouri.org, there's a splash as soon as you get there that will allow you to sign up for our newsletter. And you can also follow us on social. So Empower is very, very active on both Facebook and Twitter. You can find us with an easy search of Empower Missouri. And our communications director does an awesome job of putting
Yes.
out not only information about bills, but really culling news articles from local, statewide, and national news sources to make sure that our supporters have all the information that they need about these basic needs issues, to be great advocates in the state.
I guess finally, where do you see yourself positioning Empower Missouri, assuming you'll stay there for 5 years, Where do
It's
you
the hope.
where do you want to position Empower Missouri over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. So, like I said, I mean, I would love for this to be a huge period of growth for the organization. I think that we have some immensely talented staff and that we have just this really incredible group of coalition members who are doing this work every single day at the state level to make really critical changes across the state of Missouri. So, you know, I would love to see us building our coalitions immensely to make sure that we have representation from all areas of the state and to make sure that we have not only organizations from all parts of the state represented, but the voices of affected individuals from all parts of the state represented. And the other thing that I would really love to see in the long term is that we could expand some of our work to do more training and support for organizations who want to set their own advocacy agenda, right? So long before coming to Empower, I had been out sort of beating the drum in the community, presenting at conferences, and working with clients and saying, look, you know, if you are a direct service organization that isn't doing any policy advocacy, like you're not doing enough, right? Like we need every nonprofit to be having a voice to change these policies that are incredibly harmful to the people that we serve. And I got a lot of pushback on that, a lot of anger from folks who have been doing this work for a long time. And it's not that they don't do it well, right? Like we have incredible providers in the St. Louis area who are and across the state who are, you know, providing food, who are providing housing, who are providing health and mental health care. But I think more and more there's starting to be this awakening across the country to recognize that we are so held back by systems and structures. And so we have this incredible knowledge and expertise at Empower on how we can fight to change those systems and structures through advocacy at the local level and at the state level. And I would love to see us be doing more training and support of organizations to make sure that every one of our frontline service providers has a really big voice in changing those policies across the state.
Mallory, how do people get in touch with Empower Missouri?
Visit our website at empowermissouri.org or find us on Facebook or Twitter.
Is there a phone number? Not that I know that not everybody's in the office all the time, so
Yeah, I was gonna.
maybe I should allow you to punt on that one.
We do have a central office number, but I will say that no one is working in our Jeff City office at the moment because of COVID. So I'm hesitant to have people call and get a recording for weeks at a time between when folks are at the office. But you can find
that's fair, believe me. That's fair.
But you can find the email addresses of all of our staff on our website. So feel free to reach out to anyone on our team, and we would love to hear from you.
Mallory Rusch, thank you for joining me today on our Facebook Live, which we will put on Facebook after I make sure that everything worked. I appreciate that. Maybe after the session, we can get you back on and have a conversation of how it went. Even though we know, and I'll always advocate for our legislators to be year-round, because I think things just don't happen between January and May. But that's a steep road to hoe, and I'm not going there today. But maybe get you back on and do a scorecard to see how you did.
I would love that.
Mallory, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great to talk with you.
You take care. Have a good one. Be safe out there.
Thanks, you too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.